Hey everyone, welcome back to the Closet Writer Chronicles. I'm your host Sangeeta, aka the Moody Marshmallow. It's so good to be back. Oh my god, I cannot believe we are done with season 1 and we're just about to start season 2, which is really exciting. So, first off, this is a special bonus episode. Why am I releasing this episode? Because, as some of you may know, we just crossed 1,000 plays on all platforms collectively. So, really happy and grateful about that. Thank you to the community, all the guests, listeners, everyone who's, shown so much faith in this show and who's continuously been, listening in. It's just amazing. It's great. Thank you guys so much. It really means a lot to me. Also, I realize this episode is coming out a bit late. I apologize for that. I had some technical difficulties with my editing software, and my microphone decided to kind of give me some trouble, but that's all been sorted, and better late than never, right? So, a couple of months ago, I had put out a poll on Instagram for anyone who is not following the page. Please follow the Closet Writer Chronicles on Instagram. I put out a lot of, polls and updates on the show there. So, I had put out a poll there a couple of months ago, asking the community if there was anything, they wanted to know about the show, about me, etc. And a bunch of y'all sent some questions, and what I did is I got one of my guests from season 1 to interview me with those questions. So I've answered those, and that's what you're going to hear on this episode. I am being interviewed by Samay Soni. You might remember him from season 1, episode 3, Master of Dungeons, Dragons, and Engineering. Go check that episode out if you haven't already. And check this episode out as well if you want to know what's been happening with the podcast, what's happening with season 2, and also just some questions about what my podcasting journey has been like and a bunch of other fun stuff. So tune in.
All right, welcome to the Closet Rider Chronicles, the podcast by Samay Soni for today. Originally started by the great Sangeeta Menon, and today we're going to be interviewing her. I have her as my guest. We've flipped the tables, and we're going to be deep diving into some of the things that make her tick and what her life is all about. Hi, Sangeeta.
Hi, Samay. Thank you for that. I don't know if it was a sarcastic introduction or you were
It
being
was
genuine,
not
but thank
sarcasm.
you.
Oh my god. It was not. It was just a very genuine, very sincere introduction. I genuinely think you're great.
Thanks. For people who don't get the references right now, please go listen to Samay's episode from season 1. We know each other from high school, so you can expect banter on this episode. Just a disclaimer out there. Yes, Samay, you may continue.
I give banter to everyone. It's just the banter is a little more fun with you. All right. So I wanted to actually like to pick up on some of the questions that have been coming in from the community that you've been engaged with. Your podcast has really picked up, and I think the community just wanted to ask you more about who's running that podcast and really get to know you better. So talking about you as a person in terms of everything that you've been doing, not just with the podcast, but with your writing and this whole engagement that you have in your personal life. Where's this inspiration coming from?
With the podcast, okay. So, honestly, when I started, it was really just to create a platform to kind of showcase other people who I knew that were doing really cool things creatively. So, originally, the Closet Writer Chronicles was actually a series I was doing on my Instagram page, which I had started for putting out my writing work. And I just wanted to kind of, showcase different people I knew who were writing either, poetry or opinion pieces or fiction, nonfiction, whatever. And it really just started like that. And over time, what happened was I was having deeper conversations with these people that I was featuring. And I thought it would be really cool if there was some way to kind of get those conversations out. And I figured the best way to do that was a podcast. And then I was just really lucky that, Spotify and Anchor happened at that time. and it went through. And thankfully, whoever I featured on Instagram at that point agreed to also do the show, which was great. So, I mean, that's really where it started. But there have been a few other sources of inspiration behind it. So, if I talk about, say, the format and of the show and what it is, I really take a lot of inspiration from the Modern Love podcast by the New York Times, and also this other podcast called Poetry Darbar by Laksh Datta, where he interviews different poets and they perform pieces they've written. So I think those two have been big. And of course, even like, say, the Humans of New York pages, where you have real people coming and, talking about things that are important to them. So I think those have been really like strong sources of inspiration.
Yeah, I think poetry the bar has also been something that I've been connected to as well. It's been brilliant. And your podcast has really picked up. I mean, the stats on this are amazing. The people have really been coming in, listening to it. What do you think is really driving that engagement? Because we have content like this, Humans of New York and Poetry the Bar, like you said, people being interviewed about their life. So, what exactly do you focus on, in terms of your area?
Um, so I think for me, the way I approach the podcast really is that, you know, it's what do I want to know from the person I'm talking to? What is their life story really? I mean, yes, of course, creativity is a part of it, their creative process is a part of it, and what they do professionally is also, ties in. But I really want to know, but these are just elements of a person, right? They just make up a person as a whole, in a sense. And I think that's what I want to try and get out. Of course, you can't showcase a person completely on one episode in like 40 45 minutes or whatever, but I think if I can just get the essence of the person out, then it's also almost like creating, and I always say this with the podcast, I'm also trying to create this sort of audio anthology of sorts, where each person is almost like a chapter, and you kind of get a sneak peek into the person's life and what they're doing and how they've gotten to where they are. So that's really what I look at. And I don't know, I think stories just generally resonate, right? I think if you're truly authentic and if what you're putting out is genuine, and I feel like even if the guest is also comfortable and they're, at ease and in a way having a good time, having fun, it does translate somewhere and people do kind of respond and engage. So at least that's how I'm looking at it. I don't know too much of the technical side of it, so to speak. I'm just doing it with a lot of heart really. Yeah, hopefully that's working, but yeah, fingers crossed. Hopefully we'll pick up more, we'll have more seasons, more guests. So, yeah.
No, I think you definitely had a beautiful journey so far, a very genuine engagement with this. I don't know if the people are aware of the prologue, the chapter that came before in your life as a podcaster, your journey as a writer and a poet. Because even when I was around as well, I saw you going to a lot of clubs, a lot of meetups for poetry, for spoken word. And so, can you tell me a little bit about that chapter of your life that preceded this phase, how it was to grow as a writer?
Oh, so I started blogging in 2017, and it started very randomly, in the sense that I was going through a not so great phase. It was a bit of a low phase in my life. And I just remember waking up feeling very frustrated one day. It was like a Tuesday morning or something. And I was just, I don't know, just really overwhelmed and not in a good way. And I don't know, instinctively, I just opened my laptop, opened a Word document, and I just started typing. Next thing I know, 30 minutes later, I have my first poem in front of me. And it wasn't like I was planning on writing a poem. I just wanted to type. It's like I just needed to get something out of my system, which came in the form of a poem. And then I just started a WordPress blog on a complete whim, and that's how the Moody Marshmallow was born. And yeah, that's really how it started. And I continued doing that on the side. And like you said, like I'd go for open mics, try my hand at spoken word here and there, but I wasn't really doing it seriously. It was more like a hobby or side hustle, as they say. And then, of course, the pandemic hit, and then we all had time to do things. So that's when I started focusing more on writing. And I was fortunate to get opportunities where I could kind of learn more about writing and explore what I liked about it and what I could do. And yeah, today I am here with a career in publishing, which is great. So yeah, no complaints there.
Being interviewed. Also, as a footnote for our guests and listeners, Moody Marshmallow is Sangeeta's pen name. Now, talking about the pandemic, the point that you just mentioned, a lot of people explored things that they enjoyed doing or had wanted to do and really jumped into their personal lives a little more given that they had more free time. Has that somehow manifested as an impact on the way you've been finalizing guests? Has your quality of guests or the access to certain experiences improved because a lot of people are doing a lot more?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, of course, I think, like I said earlier, the pandemic, I think, was a period where people just had a lot more time, especially those, I think, who were really privileged enough, who, had, a place to stay, didn't have too many financial constraints, were still okay in that sense, because you couldn't even really go out and work as much. And okay, there was work from home, but it wasn't as intense in the beginning. So I think, yeah, a lot of people, I saw a lot of people take to like baking, doing that whole dalgona coffee thing, for example. And then suddenly you had some 100 new writer pages come on Instagram. And that's when I really engaged with the social media community of writers also, because they'd have like these, virtual open mics on like Instagram, on IGTV, and they just, call up people and they'd present their work, which I thought was really cool. And people were doing it consistently over like a period of time as well. And I think they've like now built full-fledged careers out of it, which is really cool. So yeah, I mean, I think that's also been an eye opener in the sense that, oh, there is so much talent around us, and I don't think we have enough platforms to kind of showcase that. So yeah, that was definitely a part of it as well.
And so, looking at people who build careers out of that, or just looking back at your season one, what are some of the more interesting moments that you've had, or some of the interesting stories that have really impacted you personally and maybe caught you off guard or changed the way you look at things?
Oh, there are many, honestly speaking. And I know this is going to sound a bit diplomatic, but it's so funny because I feel like every conversation I've had on the podcast, I've had it at a time in my life where I needed to have it, if that makes sense. Because I feel like I was also obviously growing and going through things during that time. And just the fact that I would be, recording with people every other week and putting these episodes out, it was so funny how the conversations would just resonate to me at that point in my life. But of course, I will mention certain specific conversations which really did stay with me. I think, first of all, I have to mention Megha Vasudevan, which was the season opener. That was a really special episode. And I know even when I was, insisting on putting her as a season opener, I got a lot of questions from like my mentors and stuff at Podcast Lab saying that, will this work? Will it open well? Is this the kind of person? Do you want like a bigger name to come in? And I was very clear that I wanted her to be the first episode because I felt like her story and just she represented everything I wanted the show to be about, which was about, new talent, kind of in a way finding the extraordinary in the ordinary, talking about, say, design, having a normal job. And also she was like living away from home, so we are talking about isolation during the pandemic. And she was starting her own business, and also we spoke about her, being pansexual and her coming out during the pandemic, which I thought was again an important conversation to have. And it was just, filled with a lot of heart, as they say, and which is why I was very clear that that's what I wanted the first episode to be. So I was very happy that, we got to do that as a season opener, and it was received very well. I have to say, Mega's episode is still one of the highest streamed episodes we have today on the show, and I'm so proud of that. And more power to her and all the other guests I've had. So that's definitely been one. The second one, again, Raja Rajeshwari Mahita. This I had mentioned on my previous bonus episode also. Just the fact that, she's someone who's found her calling in her 50s and she's really going after what she wants. She has a thriving creative career, so to speak. It's just so inspiring to see her live her life. So that was very special, and I really hope I get to chat with her again. And I would say a third conversation would have to be with Suchin Mehrotra from Film Companion. that was special because we spoke about his career from, going from investment banking to pursuing film journalism. And it was interesting because I had that conversation at a point in my life where I was figuring out if I wanted to kind of go back into corporate or if I still wanted to pursue a creative career and get into publishing. And I felt like somewhere that conversation gave me a lot of clarity and also just gave me a certain like nudge, or I guess encouragement to kind of go after what I wanted to do. And I'm glad that I had that conversation because it really helped me. And touch wood, things have gone well. So yeah, I think these are some of the ones that have remained really special. But yeah, otherwise I think all of them have just been such wonderful conversations, and they've all just been special in their own way.
As hippie as it's gonna sound, I find it really cool that it was almost like the universe was talking to you at certain points in your life through these people, that this is what you want to be focusing on, or if this is what you're struggling with, this here is one more person who went through the same thing.
Yeah, for sure, definitely. I mean, I think, yeah, serendipity, right, as they call it.
So now, talking about the first episode that you had with Mega, honestly, there were so many things, so many touch points in that particular conversation, which would have been very impactful topics in isolation by themselves, but having it all together, knowing that Spotify was involved, knowing that the stakes were much higher than before in that part of your journey. How did you feel putting your art and work out over there for people to receive?
I mean, I think, yeah, I mean, though I was producing and hosting the podcast, I think something I was very aware of is that I'm actually, platforming and showcasing other people and their stories and their work. And I think something I made very clear to myself also in the beginning is that this show, even though I'm the one facilitating it, it's not about me. It's about the guests. It's about each person who comes on here. It's about how do I spotlight them, how do I make the episode completely about them. Because I have seen certain interview podcasts where the podcast where the host essentially takes most of the limelight as opposed to the guests who are there. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just that I knew that I didn't want to function that way, and I really wanted to be more about the guests who come on. And which is why I'm very particular also about who I'm choosing, what kind of conversations I want to have with the person, what kind of questions I'm asking. And I want to make the process as collaborative as possible. That's very important to me. What does the guest want to talk about? What do they not want to talk about? Because you also have to respect the fact that they're also putting themselves out there, right? And they're trusting you while doing that, because as a host, I've invited them on the show, so I have to make it as comfortable and as in a way fun as possible for them as well to be able to do this. So I think that's always been my primary focus with the podcast. So yeah.
There does seem to be a lot of empathy involved with the people coming on board on this platform. So is that something that you consider sets apart your particular podcast, or is that a skill that every podcaster should have?
I don't know if it sets apart my podcast from other podcasts, but yeah, I think especially if you are doing an interview podcast, you definitely need to be empathetic, because I feel like you sort of need to be able to pick up on cues, right? Your guest gives you. I think, especially, I know in today's day and age, it's difficult to do, in person recordings, which is why we have technology. So if possible, try to keep your videos on so you can pick up on visual cues at least while recording. But also I think even if you're doing, say, a monologue, I feel like there is a certain empathy you need in terms of understanding your listeners, like what do they really want to, I guess, listen to, or what is the kind of content they're consuming. It also really comes down to what you want to talk about and what kind of podcast you're putting out. Because if it's something, you know like, it could be comedy for all you know, right? And that also has to still relate to someone somewhere, even if it's very niche. Like, it might not be something I find funny, but hey, 10 other people might find something funny, and they might be like, oh my god, yeah, this is great, this person gets it, I relate. So I think, yeah, that way, of course, I think everyone needs a certain level of empathy for sure to at least be able to sustain and thrive for sure.
I think this is a decent enough segue to also move towards maybe some of the listeners who might want to explore podcasting themselves. And that was an interesting point that you gave, having your videos on to give visual cues to make sure the podcast stays in line. What has your journey been as a podcaster in terms of figuring out what it takes to really host a platform like this, from selecting guests, really the nitty gritties of it, to handling the technicalities?
Oh, it's it requires a lot of consistency for sure, a lot of discipline, and really, I think you really need to enjoy doing this to be able to sustain as well. Because I know how much fun I had doing season one. I loved reaching out to people, coordinating. I mean, of course, it was chaotic at times just to kind of, because there'd be weeks where I was literally, record, edit, get the episode out because I had deadlines also to meet because I was a part of the Podcast Lab program. So, of course, it was getting a little hectic there, but it was still very enjoyable and I had a lot of fun. And more than anything, I loved the conversations I was having and I felt like I was just taking back so much. So I think, yeah, anyone who's looking to start a podcast, I would say, I mean, first things first, what do you want to talk about, right? Then what is the best way to present it? Is podcasting the best way to present what you want to talk about? And if it is, then do you want to do it as a monologue? Do you want to do it as a two-person conversation? Do you want it to be interview based? Figure your format, experiment, play around a bit, maybe do like 2 3 pilot episodes, see if you can be consistent with it, try and build like a schedule for how you want to go about production. And yeah, so make sure you keep those things in mind. And of course, technology, I feel like, is something you'll anyway learn on the job, because I learned editing like completely on the spot. So yeah, I mean, you'll build new skill sets also for sure. So yeah.
There was no one helping you at all.
No, nobody. I mean, of course, I had like a mentor from Podcast Lab and there were people I could go to, but for like very say questions regarding feedback on the content I was doing, does it seem to be going in the right direction in that sense? And of course, technically, if I had doubts, there was a community I could reach out to for sure. But I think YouTube has been a great savior, honestly speaking. I feel like in that sense technology has been great, and I think some of my guests have also been podcasters themselves, so they've been super helpful whenever I've had any doubts. So in that sense, yeah. But otherwise, I mean, of course, pre-production, production, post-production is all me.
That sounds honestly overwhelming, but this has been a pretty successful outcome so far. And I think also, like, personally, I don't remember life before YouTube, so I definitely resonate with that. I mean,
Yeah,
YouTube has
I know.
been, I mean, anything you want to just Google or YouTube and just go online, you have all the answers ready.
Yeah, true that.
But talking about the guests themselves, so when you would talk to your mentors about the content, did you always have those questions ready for your guests? Did you always know what you wanted to ask them, or was it something a little different of a process?
So okay, so I feel like it kind of goes hand in hand, because the way I approached season one, at least, was when the announcement came that I was selected to do the program. Like instinctively, I was like, okay, I need guests. So the first thing I did is I just reached out to everyone I had featured on my Instagram series, and thankfully, whoever I reached out to said yes, and I more or less knew what I wanted to ask them, because I had already had conversations with them earlier when I was talking to them about the series anyway. So I sort of had some idea of what I could ask them. And also, it did help that I knew most of them personally, like, say, from school or otherwise. So, again, that was also easy in terms of how I could navigate a conversation. So the initial set of guests were very easy. After that, what I sat and did is I made a list of 50 people who I could just approach. Who do I want to really interview? Like a list of 50 guests who I want to like talk to and would love to have on the podcast. So I sat and made this list, and then I looked at, okay, who have I already signed up? So there were 6 guests who I had featured on Instagram, and I said, okay, so these are the 6 guests, this is what each person is doing, who's doing something different, how much more diversity can I include, what are other fields I can look at, what are other journeys I can look at. So on that basis, I kind of started shortlisting people, started reaching out, and thankfully, whoever I reached out to was very positive about it. And most of them came and did the show, which I'm very grateful for. So yeah, I think that was really the process, honestly. And in terms of questions also, even when I'm looking at a guest, I'm like, okay, why do I want to talk to this person? What do I really want to know about this person? What's so interesting about their journey, and it doesn't have to be something like, oh my god, this person like flew to the moon and back or something like that. It can be someone who has like a normal everyday job but is doing something interesting on the side, like say writing poetry, or has like a blog or something like that. Yes, it's raining, we have monsoons here, if you can hear that. but yeah but yeah, that's basically been my process.
Got it. Some of these guests that you didn't know personally before, are these interviews that will come up in season two, or have they already been part of season one? People you met only for these interviews.
Yeah, I mean, for example, season one, I didn't know Sachin Mehrotra at all. I literally just sent him an Instagram DM on, like, I think it was like Republic Day, and he replied the same evening saying that, sure, I'll do it. Do we want to record next week? So, that was very surprising. That was one case, I remember. There was also Laksh Datta, who runs Poetry Darbar. So I didn't know him, but I had messaged him previously regarding his podcast and how much I really liked his work. And he had responded at that point. So I had some form of open channel of communication there. So I just kind of followed up there. And again, he was also very positive about it, and he agreed to be on the show, which was very special for me because I remember listening to his podcast in like 2021, and then cut to 2022 January, I'm like recording an episode with him, which was like such a full circle experience for me. So yeah, I think those definitely have been some special cases. Everyone else, I think, I've known in some capacity personally or professionally, so it's not been too difficult to reach out in that sense.
But going forward, of course, the guests will be coming from all different places, given that you'll be starting to reach out to people who you might not again know, and
Yeah,
that
of
part of
course.
the yes. So how is that going to be, and are you going to be exploring new formats for season two with those kinds of guests?
Um, yeah, so it's interesting because so the lineup is more or less set for season two, the initial lineup for sure. And it is very different from season one, let me tell you that. I think the conversations are going to be very different. Of course, the industries and fields also to some degree will be different from what you saw in season one. Season two is, touch with that way, has a lot more diversity, but yeah, in terms of format, I'm not really playing around too much, but that also, I think it depends from episode to episode, because even if you look at, say, my season one episodes, the basic format is, I mean, it's essentially in three parts where, it opens with a guest talking about what, creativity means to them. Then we jump into the interview, and then the guest presents, original work that they've written or, produced or whatever. So, I mean, in that sense, it's still going to be the same. But of course, there have been anomalies in the sense that, say, Diya Rekhi's episode was a two-part episode. Akshat Rajan was a two-part episode. Raja Rajeshwari Maheta, we didn't really stick to that format. It was just one full flowing conversation where she presented her work within the conversation. So it really depends from guest to guest, and how the conversation goes, what the guest is also comfortable with. I always say that there's no hard and fast rule that I have to stick, with one format or one structure. Because if something else works for another guest, and I think if that is working better, then why not? And it might even like translate better for listeners also, is what I feel. Of course, some form of consistency definitely helps, but yeah, I'm open to being flexible that way.
So the focus really has been on the guest rather than the podcast and the format and whatever structure you'd want to force that guest into. So it's really been about pushing the guest forward.
Yeah, pretty much.
And standing on this side of season one, what do you feel now about everything that's happened?
I can't believe I did it, honestly speaking. Because if you told me last year that I'd be doing a podcast, I mean, I feel like I'm like the last person who would have like done a podcast also, because I had no idea what podcasts were. I think I was very fortunate, and I have to give a shout out to Bound here. They were like the first creative agency I worked with, and it was because I worked with them. I worked with Aishwarya Zavalgaikar, who's the head of content and podcast there. And I got to work with her on the Book People, which is a Bound original podcast, and I really saw the impact audio was having on people, and I thought that, oh, this would be an interesting space to kind of venture into. And again, I was very fortunate that Anchor and Spotify was happening at that time, and I got selected. And again, very fortunate that all the guests I reached out to agreed to be a part of this and showed the faith they did in the show. So I think it's just been surreal that it actually happened. That, now when I stand and look back, that man, I did 24 episodes with 21 guests. It's like crazy. But it's been so it's surreal, it's overwhelming in such a positive way. And yeah, I'm excited for season two.
And honestly, I'm sure this journey has been impactful for you as well, not just your listeners, right? So, have there been changes in you that you've noticed just blossoming as a podcaster coming into this journey? Something, some kind of an influence that the guests have had on you and how you've grown as a person doing all this.
Hmm. I mean, changes in the sense, I don't know if I'm aware of the changes, but I think what has been interesting is just hearing different perspectives. And I think, like we spoke about empathy, right? I think it definitely helps build on that as well, because I think when you talk to different people, at least for me, when I talk to different people now, I'm a little, I think I'm more empathetic than I usually am. I'm really like listening in. I'm really trying to understand where the person is coming from. Because you have like these 20 odd conversations and 20 different perspectives, and people coming from different walks of life. So it really gives you a sort of some form of worldview in a sense, which really I think you can carry forward into other aspects of your life when you interact with people outside of this. So I think in that sense, it's been really helpful, and that's been a skill. But yeah, in terms of changes in my writing, I haven't really noticed anything yet. But of course, I mean, because I worked on a podcast, it's definitely helped me in terms of learning how to script like audio shows and like, audio visual shows, or like light and sound shows and stuff like that, for sure. So that's been an interesting journey.
And in relation to all of this, what about your family? So, have they been also supportive of your venture and have they been contributing in some way? Of course, I have to ask this question.
Yeah, that's a trick question. Um, no, no, but I think so. I think my mother's been super supportive. Honestly, my father has been as well, but I think he just has concerns, as all Indian fathers or parents do. But they're very valid concerns, honestly speaking. It's not like it's coming from a place of, oh, I don't want you to do what you want to do. It's more like, the security, the stability of it. Can you really make something out of it? And I think now, with the way my career is moving and the fact that I've really found something I enjoy doing, and that I am finding roles that really fit my liking and my abilities. So I think now that's more tangible, right, for them to also see. So, yeah, I mean, I think obviously there is support and acceptance in that sense now. But yeah, I mean, otherwise, there was never anything like, oh my God, if you do this, you have to get out of the house. No, obviously not. It's just like normal questions like, oh, but, is this secure? Is this stable? Will you be able to sustain yourself doing this and stuff like that? But yeah, I mean, it's all been good. So yeah, touch wood.
Now, I don't know if I'm as authoritative as you in selecting guests, but if you ask me, your career's definitely been interesting enough to have you back as a guest on this podcast. Honestly, I think
Oh,
you've definitely made something out of this.
thank you. I hope your listeners agree to this, but sure.
And if there's one thing that you could end with, if there's one thing that you could tell your listeners about season two as a teaser or a trailer to expect something in
Ooh.
the coming interviews, what would that be?
Can I be cliche and say expect the unexpected? Because seriously, expect the unexpected.
If that's a
But
good representation, then why not?
yeah, I mean, honestly, but I think just expect more diversity in terms of guests and conversations, for sure. Honestly, even I don't know what to expect, because even when I walked into season one, I didn't know what to expect. And I'm not keeping any expectation from season two, because I just feel like each conversation will be special in its own way. And it's sometimes only when you have the conversation and you come out of it and you're like, oh my God, this is like mind blowing. This is amazing. Listeners are going to really take, this and this from this episode. So, yeah, I think I'm just really looking forward to, start the recordings, which I have lined up later this month and so on. So, yeah. And if all goes well, listeners can expect season two in September. So, that's a certain piece of information I will throw out there for sure.
Well, September it is. All right. So this has been a moment in the life of Sangeeta Menon. Thank you so much for this interview and this opportunity to be here with you. I think my personal experience with your podcast has been quite amazing, and I'm sure the listeners are looking forward to season two as well. I'm sure it's going to be one hell of an experience.
Thank you so much, Samay. This was fun, and I'm kind of happy you didn't grill me as much because I was a bit concerned.
I was an interviewer. I'm supposed to be nice. I'm supposed to be empathetic. I picked it up on the go.
No, but thank you so much for agreeing to do this. It's always a pleasure talking to you. And I have to say, this is something I really have to throw out to listeners just as like a fun story or fun fact. But
Oh God.
Samay is actually one of the first people who told me to write in 2017 before I started my blog. It was like a random WhatsApp message. We were like, I think, catching up or something, and he said, he was like, oh, you should write. And yeah, so you were one of the first people who told me that, so thank you for that.
I thought it was going to be an embarrassing story, dude. Like the moment you said, "Oh, I'm going to share a story," I'm like, "Oh my God, not this." So... but yeah, I mean, I've always loved your work, so I'm glad it's out there now.
Yeah, thank you so much.
All right, all the best for season two, and for listeners who are listening to this, look forward to September for the upcoming interviews.
So that was my conversation with Samay Soni. I hope that answered most of your questions. If you have any more questions, or want to just write in about your thoughts regarding the show or anything, you can always reach me on Instagram at the Closet Writer Chronicles, or you can write in via email at theclosetwriterchronicles@gmail.com. I hope you're excited for season 2 because I sure am, and it is releasing in September, which is this month. So be prepared. It's going to be special, and I cannot wait to share it with you guys. So I will talk to you real soon with some new guests and some new chronicles to share. Talk real soon.